October 1971. A tired engineer named Federico Fagan stares at a tiny piece of silicon no bigger than his fingernail. Behind him, months of 18-hour days. Around him, a company bleeding money, a partnership on the brink of collapse, and a Japanese calculator company demanding refunds. In his hand? A chip that would change everything, but nobody knew it yet. This is the story of the Intel 4004, the world's first microprocessor. Not just the technology, but the human obsession, the desperate gambles, and the ordinary lives transformed by a revolution most people never saw coming. Our countdown begins with a crisis. In 1969, a Japanese company called Bizicom approached Intel with an ambitious problem. They wanted 12 custom chips for a new line of calculators that would dominate the market. But Intel was a struggling memory chip startup, barely 3 years old. The contract was worth everything, but the design Bizicom wanted was monstrously complex and expensive to manufacture. Intel couldn't afford to build it. Bizicom couldn't afford to wait. Both companies were staring at financial disaster. The calculator market was ruthless, margins were razor-thin, and time was running out. Enter Ted Hoff, a brilliant Stanford-trained engineer who looked at Bizicom's 12-chip design and thought, what if we do the opposite? Instead of 12 specialized chips, what if one general-purpose chip could be programmed to do anything? The idea was radical. Chips were always built for one task, hardwired, inflexible. A programmable chip? That was practically a computer. And computers filled entire rooms, cost millions, and required teams of specialists. The notion that you could shrink that power onto a single chip seemed impossible. Hoff's colleagues were skeptical. His bosses were nervous. But desperation makes visionaries. Innovation sounds glamorous. The reality? Marriages strained by endless overtime. Engineers sleeping under desks. Families seeing their fathers only on Sundays. Federico Fagan, the Italian engineer who would actually design the chip circuits, worked 18-hour days for 9 months straight. His wife barely recognized him. The pressure was crushing. Intel needed this to work, Bizicom needed it delivered, and every week of delay meant more money hemorrhaging. These weren't cartoon tech bros chasing glory. They were ordinary people with mortgages and kids, betting everything on a tiny piece of silicon that might not even function. Here's what people forget, in 1970, Silicon Valley wasn't Silicon Valley yet. It was orchards and cheap office parks south of San Francisco. Intel operated out of a modest building in Mountain View. No billion-dollar campuses. No celebrity CEOs. Just a scrappy startup founded by defectors from Fairchild Semiconductor, trying to survive in the brutal semiconductor business. The entire company employed fewer than 1,000 people. Memory chips, their main product, were becoming commoditized. Profit margins were collapsing. Intel needed a breakthrough or they'd become another forgotten footnote in tech history. Everything rode on this bizarre calculator project nobody really understood. Ted Hoff's design was elegant but terrifying. 4 chips instead of 12, 1 central processing unit, 1 read-only memory, 1 random access memory, and 1 shift register for input-output. The CPU, the 4004, would be the brain, executing instructions stored in memory. It could add, subtract, and move data. That's it. But by programming different instructions, it could become a calculator, a controller, a data processor, anything. The architecture was called stored program computing, borrowed from mainframe computers. Cramming it onto a chip smaller than a postage stamp? Engineers at other companies called it science fiction. Intel was betting the company it wasn't. Ted Hoff had the concept. Federico Fagan had to make it real. Fagan had just arrived from Fairchild Semiconductor in April 1970, and Intel immediately threw him into the deep end. He had to design the actual logic circuits, lay out every transistor, and invent new design techniques because nobody had done this before. There were no software tools. He drew circuits by hand, calculated timing by hand, debugged by instinct. He invented silicon gate technology improvements that made the chip fast enough to be useful. 9 months. That's all the time Bizicom would wait. Fagan delivered the first working 4004 in March 1971, 2 months ahead of schedule. It was a miracle of obsession. Here's the cruel irony: Bizicom got their calculator chip in 1971, but by then their business was imploding. The calculator market had become a bloodbath, prices were crashing, Japanese competitors were flooding the market, and Bizicom was hemorrhaging cash. They couldn't pay Intel the full contract amount. They asked for a price reduction and, in exchange, gave up exclusive rights to the 4004. Intel now owned a general-purpose microprocessor. But what was it good for? Inside Intel, most executives saw it as a niche product, maybe useful for traffic lights or elevators. The marketing team barely understood it. The world's first microprocessor sat on the shelf, waiting for someone to realize what they had. November 15, 1971. Intel placed a small advertisement in Electronic News magazine. The headline read, "Announcing a new era of integrated electronics." The ad described the 4004 as a microprogrammable computer on a chip. It was the first time the word microprocessor appeared in public. The response was quiet. A few engineers requested data sheets out of curiosity. But slowly, something remarkable happened. Designers started imagining applications Intel had never considered: industrial controllers, medical devices, test equipment, even early arcade games. The 4004 wasn't a solution looking for a problem. It was a blank canvas, and creative engineers started painting. The 4004 didn't change your life overnight. You didn't wake up one morning with a computer on your desk. The revolution was invisible, buried inside machines you never thought about. Traffic lights got smarter. Gas pumps became programmable. Factory robots gained flexibility. Medical monitors became portable. The 4004 was too slow and limited for anything dramatic, but it proved the concept. Intel released the 8008, then the legendary 8080. Competitors rushed in. Motorola made the 6800. MOS Technology made the 6502, which powered the Apple II and Atari. By the late 70s, microprocessors were everywhere, silently reshaping infrastructure, commerce, healthcare, entertainment. The world transformed while people weren't looking. And now, number 1, the 4004 led directly to you, right now, watching this video. Without that tiny chip, there's no Intel 8080. Without the 8080, there's no Altair 8800 hobbyist computer. Without the Altair, Bill Gates and Paul Allen don't write software and Microsoft never happens. Without cheap microprocessors, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak can't build the Apple II in a garage. No personal computers. No video games. No internet as we know it, because the web required millions of affordable computers to connect. No smartphones, no social media, no streaming, no modern life. The 4004 wasn't the first computer. It was the first computer you could afford, miniaturize, and mass-produce. Federico Fagan's 9 months of 18-hour days unlocked the future. That exhausted engineer staring at a fingernail-sized chip in 1971? He was holding your entire world, and he didn't even know it yet. That's the human story of the computer revolution: ordinary people, extraordinary obsession, and a tiny piece of silicon that changed everything.